Good morning. For those joining us via live stream, welcome. I'm Shioni Flegel, the Executive Director at Housing California. It's wonderful to be with you here today. On behalf of our Board of Directors and Housing California staff and the Gubernatorial Forum Host Committee, we're proud to host this discussion with candidates here in Sacramento, the heart of statewide policymaking. This event is part of Housing California's annual Affordable Housing and Homelessness Conference. Housing California is a nonpartisan statewide advocacy organization. Since 1988, we've worked to create a California with homes, health, and prosperity for all in thriving, sustainable communities. We bring together a diverse cross-sector network, the people and organizations in this room, and so many partners joining us virtually to prevent and end homelessness, increase the supply of safe, stable, affordable homes, protect low-income renters, and reverse the racial and economic inequities embedded in our housing systems. Our work is rooted in three pillars. We build power, we shape narratives, and we advance transformative statewide policy solutions, particularly those outlined in our recently relaunched Roadmap Home, which you can find on our website. As we work to advance our mission, the communities we serve are facing a host of interconnected challenges. California is a global economic powerhouse, but for too many Californians, stability, including a safe, affordable place to live, remains out of reach. The cost to live here and thrive looms over all of us. Paying for food, childcare, healthcare, and education is out of reach for too many of our neighbors. We're experiencing the direct impacts of climate change, which will continue to shape our future in uncertain ways. The audience gathered here today are not spectators in this conversation. They are the builders, service providers, organizers, and resident leaders fighting for a better California and working to assure that every Californian has a safe, affordable place to call home. Despite the incredible progress we've made in recent years, the next governor will inherit one of the most urgent social and economic challenges in California's history. Our next governor will play a pivotal role in determining whether the state moves forward towards stability and opportunity, or whether the crisis deepens. I want to thank the candidates who have come here today for their participation, our media partner, CalMatters, the Housing California staff and volunteers who made this morning possible, and of course, our host committee for helping us plan this special event. This includes Housing Action Coalition, PICO California, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, California Coalition for Rural Housing, and Dignity Health California Region. Can our host committee organizations please stand for just a second? It's very dark, maybe you can't see them, but thank them for all of their support and work to make this possible. It's now my honor to introduce our moderator, Ben Christopher of CalMatters, who will guide today's conversation. Ben covers housing policy for CalMatters and has spent years helping Californians understand the complex policies shaping our housing system, from rent relief and zoning debates to statewide housing legislation and innovative local solutions. Before taking over the housing beat in 2023, Ben covered elections and politics for CalMatters through 4 election cycles. Ben, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to a robust and meaningful conversation.
Good morning. Thank you, Shioni, for that very kind introduction, and thank you to all of you, the many, many, many of you who've come out today. I hope you all are enjoying our mid-March summer here. The goal of today, the reason that we're all here, as I think Shioni just kind of previewed, is to hear from some of the candidates who aim to become the next governor of the state of California, about their goals, their ambitions, their vision for the state, and how they would prioritize tackling some of the most pressing issues that face the state of California. And I do not need to tell anyone in this room that the twin crises of housing affordability and homelessness are chief among them. Before we start, I've been asked to do a little bit of housekeeping, as they say. So first, I want to just explain how today's candidates were selected, in case there are any questions about that. So Housing California reached out to declared candidates a month back to see who was interested. Then those who responded by the deadline were reviewed using consistent criteria based on publicly available polling. Based on that process, 8 candidates were invited, 4 declined. We're not naming names, but their loss. The 4 candidates who graciously agreed to participate in today's forum are investor, climate activist, author, and philanthropist Tom Steyer, California Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Thurmond, former Speaker of the California State Assembly and the 41st Mayor of the City of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, and former California State Controller Betty Yee. Okay, you're all here to see them, but before we get to the fun part, a few ground rules for everyone in the room, please. First, just take this moment to take out your phone and make it not make noise in whichever way you decide. So silence it, turn it off, throw it into traffic. Also, please refrain from recording or using flash photography during the program. Please remain seated throughout the forum so that the live stream can proceed smoothly. The people at home are not interested in seeing the back of your head, though I'm sure it's lovely. And finally, we ask that you refrain from applause or cheering or hooting and hollering or any other vocal reactions during the discussion. You'll have ample opportunity to show your appreciation and enthusiasm when we welcome the candidates to the stage in a moment, and also again at the very end. So those are the rules for all of you. Thanks in advance. And now here's how this forum will work. It's not a debate, it's a forum. So I'll be asking a series of questions, and each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer. We will rotate the speaking order throughout the program, so each candidate gets the opportunity to go first or has to go first, depending on their perspective. And while I will be asking the questions, these questions were a group effort. They were informed by input by a number of stakeholders, including Housing California staff, the Conference Host Committee, and many attendees in this room who submitted questions in advance. So a special thanks to all of you who did that, who helped to make this discussion all the more thoughtful and informative. We're asking the candidates to keep their responses focused on the issues and to maintain a respectful and civil tone, so they will be playing nice. There will be no rebuttals and crosstalk between the candidates, and at the end of the forum, each candidate will have 90 seconds to make closing remarks. Okay, I'm gonna shut up, and let's meet our participating candidates. Please welcome to the stage Tom Steyer, Tony Thurmond, Antonio Villaraigosa, and Betty Yee.
Antonio. Hey, Ben. See you. Before? Come down here. Okay. Great. Good talk. Good to see you.
Thank you all for being here. Good morning. How are you all feeling?
Great.
Good. Okay, so first question we will begin with is about funding. California has no permanent state funding source for affordable housing and homelessness. Do you think the state should establish a permanent funding source for affordable housing? And if so, where is that money coming from? Mr. Steyer, we will start with you.
So I think California should start treating housing as a public investment. And that means using our money to build across the entire range, but using that money as a financing tool where we enable projects to happen. And so when you ask about funding, the question is not just how much funding we have, but how do we use it and how do we reuse it? Because to a very large extent, we are using our money to develop projects as opposed to enabling housing units to be built. So I think the way that we're using money, the way we get money right now is through bond funds. And they go in, but we very much need, that's fine with me, but the truth is we very much need to use that money as a revolving fund to enable projects, and once the projects are finished, complete, we then take the money out and reuse it. Because to a very large extent, this is about finance. And the way that we're using it is actually driving up costs so that our low-income housing units cost $900,000, way too much. This is about finance. We need to treat it like finance. We need to get professionals in there. And as an example, we didn't refi all those units when the interest rates were at 3%. We've got to start treating this like a public bank used to make housing a public investment vehicle.
Thank you. Mr. Thurman?
A short answer is yes, we need permanent funding. We are the fourth largest economy in the world, but when it comes to affordable housing, we cry poor. You know, they say that you show your values by what you put in your budget. It's time for all the talk to stop and for there to be action. And so, yes, we do have to have permanent funding. And for starters, I say we tax the billionaires and get more revenue so we have more revenue every single year to build more affordable housing. And until we get there, I'm honored to be supporting AB 736 and SB 417 to give us $10 billion more to build more affordable housing. Shame on California when 40% of our unhoused are older Californians, when we have 10,000 teenagers who are homeless in our state. We can and we must do better. You know, the ability to own a home is the American dream, and it's slipping away. My grandparents and my mom were immigrants. They came here from Colombia and Jamaica and Panama, and my mother bought a house in San Jose in the 1970s. We could never, my mom passed away when I was 6 years old. She had cancer, and my siblings and I all got split up. And I looked at what it would cost today to buy that house. We could never afford to buy that house again. And so we must not allow the American dream to slip away. And I'll just mention this, that as governor, we'll provide down payment assistance programs to Californians. And I'm not waiting to be elected governor. We're working on a plan right now to build 2 million housing units using the surplus property that exists from school districts in every single county in the state of California. We can do this. Let's get this done.
Thank you. Mr. Villagrasa.
Good morning, Housing California. Thank you for showing up. I wish all the candidates had shown up because this issue is one of the most important issues facing California. And Ben, answer to your question, absolutely we should have a permanent funding source. This year it's about 600 million. Prior to that it was more than $1 billion. We have to, but it's gonna fluctuate. And so we need a permanent funding stream. Your second question is, where's it gonna come from? I agree with Tony. It's all about priorities. We have a $300 billion plus budget. You know, the fact is, we can have a funding stream that comes from that budget. And yes, we're looking at, cuts of $18 to $35 billion next year, but housing is so important. You know, it used to be that homeownership was part of the American dream. And now for too many families, the nightmare is 2 families to an apartment, and for our kids, it's 3 roommates and a crowded apartment. We can do better than that, and as your governor, I will.
Betty?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Housing California, and to all of the partners here this morning. Look, this is really a statement about the state's commitment to housing. And if there's not a permanent source of funding for housing, what are we really doing? We're setting ourselves up for failure, frankly. When we think about housing, when I think about housing, it is the threshold issue that is the determinant that makes all other things possible. And so when I think about housing funding, it is an investment. It's an investment because we know that when we have stable, affordable, safe, quality housing, We're going to see better outcomes in terms of health. We're going to see better outcomes in terms of academic performance. We're going to see better outcomes in certain terms of public safety and crime prevention, and on and on and on. So we need to look at this permanent source of funding as offsetting other costs in the budget, because this is an investment. It's an investment that the state just should start making now and know that we have a lot of housing to build. We can leverage these dollars as well, as Thomas said, that we are going to see outcomes that are going to improve the lives and conditions of so many Californians if the state would just commit to permanent funding. Where should it come from? I agree. We should tax the billionaires and corporations that have the privilege of doing business here, but also are part of the solution in terms of how we're going to create economically sustainable communities. They thrive when we know that Californians thrive when they have safe, stable housing and can be part of this economy.
Thank you so much. So, nearly 1/3 of California renters spend more than 50% of their income on housing. California's Tenant Protection Act created renter protections including rent caps, rules around evictions, and so forth. With the TPA set to expire in 2030, would you support or oppose extending that policy, and are there other statewide actions that you would prioritize that affect struggling renters? Mr. Thurman, we'll start with you.
I would, and I think that we can come up with a way to balance some forms of rent control, but let those people who own one or two properties that were their nest egg, that maybe they got from their parents, that maybe they rent out, they should be able to have some reasonable increase and be able to cover their costs, whatever their maintenance is. And I think we have to go beyond that, though. I think, look, let's look at where we are. There's been no bond passed since 2018. This state took away redevelopment, and as governor, I plan to bring a redevelopment agency back to the state of California. We can't just pass down mandates to cities and counties without providing any resources. And again, as I mentioned in my earlier answer, there are 75,000 acres of land that's ready for development right now. And we can build affordable housing by helping school districts use their surplus property, but they need help. And that's why I'm sponsoring legislation that will get them some funds for pre-development and some technical assistance. Now, this doesn't mean that if you're a teacher, you're going to be renting from your superintendent. It doesn't work like that. Nobody would want that. It just means that districts and other municipalities that have access to so much surplus property have the ability to create what we've needed for so long, 2.3 million units by the year 2030. You know, Mayor Villaraigosa is right. This is the most important issue in this campaign, and there's some other candidates who didn't even have the decency to show up. We need you all to show up on Election Day and make sure that someone is elected who's going to fight for housing in our state.
Thank you. Mr. Villaraigosa. Mr. Villaraigosa.
You know, before I'd extend the Tenant Protection Act, I would say this. The fact of the matter is, if you look at any of the exports or any of the articles that some of you have written, the facts are clear. We need more supply. So how would we prioritize efforts that affect renters? We've got to build more market rate, more workforce, more affordable, and more homeless housing in a state that doesn't do any of those very well. The fact of the matter is, I was mayor of LA. Some of you are from LA. And you know that downtown went from 20,000 to 60,000 people in 8 years in the middle of a recession. I built more market rate, more workforce, more affordable, and more homeless housing in the middle of a recession than the 12 years before me. That's the best way to protect tenants and to drive down costs for both rent and housing. We've got to build supply. Why don't we do it? Because we make it impossible to build in this state. With overregulated environment where we're looking for the perfect instead of focusing on the good. So as governor, I'll do what I did as mayor, and I'll build that housing.
Betty.
Great. Yes, I would look to extend the Tenant Protection Act beyond 2030. Look, you know, renters are always kind of the afterthought when we talk about housing, and that should not be. Yes, it's about increasing supply, but it's also about just stabilizing communities. So many renters in this state are a paycheck away from becoming unhoused, and that is unacceptable. So I would say that we definitely want to prevent homelessness and have more protections to prevent that from happening. I would like to see some formal rental assistance program brought back that could be relied upon for those who need the help. And in terms of statewide actions, I'm going to say this. We do a lot of planning as it relates to what we need relative to housing, but when we talk about renters, the only thing we talk about is supply. And I think it's time to kind of get back into just understanding who is really at risk of becoming unhoused. Because if we can prevent that and actually help uphold those who are really on the margin of becoming unhoused, we're going to help the homelessness issue, but we're also going to really dig in terms of why people are facing these hardships. Part of housing is also looking at how do we stabilize communities where they can be economically sustainable. So backing up and really talking about not just what we're going to build, but how we're going to build to where we have economic mobility opportunities right where people are living so that they can have opportunities to earn more and hopefully be able to thrive more.
Thank you. Tom Steyer.
Well, we've been talking about this being the most important issue in California, but it is an extremely urgent issue for people. You're not supposed to spend more than 25% of your income on housing, and millions of people are spending over 50%. Last week, I was talking to a woman in Salinas whose 35-year-old son was living with her and commuting an hour and a half each way to his job at Apple Computer. That should be a really well-paid job, and he's still living at home because he can't afford rent where he works. So yes, I'm absolutely in favor of speeding up how fast we build, and we're going to get into all of that, and I have a lot of ideas. But the truth is, renters are suffering right now, and none of us, however hard we work, is going to solve that problem by building in the short term. That's why, sure, I'm for Tenant Protection Act extension. Yes, I'm for rent stabilization. I would more than double the renter's tax credit. People are really suffering, and we need to put money in their pocket because this is an issue where Californians urgently need help. Now, the truth is, we're going to go around and try and make sure, absolutely on the anti-gouging of renters, but to a very large extent, building is the solution, but it's a long-term solution. In the short run, we need to pay attention to renters. We need to do rent stabilization. And if we double the renter's tax credit, we at least put money in their pocket to make it through this problem.
Thank you. This next question is about homelessness. 2/3 of California's unhoused population live in unsheltered settings. There's ongoing debate about whether homelessness should be addressed through criminal enforcement. When, if ever, is it appropriate for cities to adopt or enforce encampment bans? And what should the state's orientation be towards these policies? We'll start with Mr. Villaraigosa.
Yes, first of all, I do not believe we should criminalize homelessness. And I don't care what you say. Secondly, I believe we should have compassion. However, I also believe we shouldn't have chaos. Selling drugs in front of cops is chaos. I don't believe that encampments should be in front of schools because we know what neighborhoods they'll be in. They shouldn't be in parks because we know what neighborhoods they'll be in. And they shouldn't, but having said that, I don't believe, like some candidates do, none of them on this stage, that you ought to put them in jail for being poor, for not having the services that they need. I think the next governor can have a balance. I think we're working with cities and counties. I do believe that they should have some bans along the lines of the ones I just mentioned, but absolute bans when they're not the housing, not the services, is absolutely unacceptable.
Thank you. Betty.
Sure. I agree with the mayor. This is something that we should not be orienting ourselves as looking at homelessness as being a crime. But there are options, and some of the successful models that I've seen around the state, frankly, have been looking at how where encampments are located that we can actually put up interim supportive housing pretty quickly. And that is a compassionate way to work on this. It's not about them moving encampments from one location to another, but we're actually trying to get to what is the root cause of some of the reasons why people are living in encampments. And this is the complexion of who is in these encampments is diverse. It's a tough issue to really address. But at the same time, if all we're doing is just looking at enforcing encampment bans, we're not solving the problem. And so really looking at how we can help cities really focus on interim supportive housing. And we've seen so many of those be a success in so many of our cities, and I hope the state can play more of a role in that.
Thank you. Mr. Dyer.
Well, first of all, I want to support what Betty E. was just saying, because no one gets better on the street. You know, only about 1 out of 7 people who becomes homeless starts with a serious mental health issue, either bipolar or substance addiction. But it is so stressful to be on the street, it is so dangerous, it creates mental health problems. So allowing people to stay on the street enables them to develop all kinds of problems. So my number one rule is keep people from going on the street, and once they're there, get them off the street as fast as possible. And that does mean exactly what Betty E. was talking about, was emergency interim housing. The idea of waiting 7 years for permanent housing is just too long. That for people to be on the street or in shelters for that long is something that clearly isn't working and is bad. And so if we can get them to places that they're willing to go to, interim housing, where they can have a room with a key, where they can bring their animal, where they can have shared dining and laundry facilities, and where there are services, is something that works and gets people off the street. Because let's also remember that the vitality of our cities is incredibly important to California. That means the safety of the streets of the cities is incredibly important. We don't quantify it, but that's a major thing. And as we build more dense housing, we need to make sure we have vibrant, livable cities.
Mr. Thurman.
I oppose locking those up who are unhoused. I'd like to lock up the people who want to lock up those who are homeless. Or let them spend a night on the street with nowhere to go. You know, look, we can send a person to the moon. Don't tell me that we cannot solve homelessness in our lifetime. Now, it's not easy. If it were easy, it would have been done. And there needs to be accountability in terms of how public funds get managed, yes. But we also, if we're going to have a policy that says we move encampments, then let's have a place for those individuals to go. We can move encampments, but there better be a place for that individual to go, whether it's shelter or we build more tiny homes. You know, other states have been so successful in building supportive housing, and I believe that we can as well. I want to shout out a nonprofit that works here in Sacramento. They also are in Oakland, and they have converted empty hotels into spaces for those who are unhoused. It's called the Lau Family Community Development Agency, and someone from Lau must be here. You know, they have over a 90% success rate of helping someone who is unhoused remain in the program, but here is why. They insist that the participants must get help for mental health needs and substance abuse. Our programs must have supportive services built in, must require mental health supports and substance abuse supports. We can do this. Let's build a better California for those who are unhoused.
Thank you so much. I want to commend you all for being so aggressively on time. I'm shocked and amazed.
It'll change.
So we're going to do a little detour. This isn't solely about housing. This is about health. Universal health coverage has been discussed as a long-term goal in California, going back decades. If elected governor, what role, if any, should the state play in expanding health coverage, particularly in light of recent funding cuts at both the state and federal level? Betty?
Okay, thank you. This is really the pressure that California is feeling, are the looming healthcare cuts in H.R. 1. You know, I think in terms of how I look at healthcare, and certainly as I look at healthcare throughout the state, we have an opportunity here in California in terms of, one, getting back to the progress that we made, and I'm going to applaud Governor Newsom for this, where we got most Californians covered, and we need to get back to that. But the other thing we know about the healthcare system is that it's fraught with inefficiencies. And I think one of the ways that I would like to see how we take on a greater role in terms of health coverage and also the funding of it is to be sure that we're wringing out the inefficiencies in the system. One of the areas is, frankly, fraud. And it's not fraud by the people who are receiving the services under Medi-Cal, but by providers submitting fraudulent claims. We have not had independent audit authority to audit claims by providers for quite a long time. It's the Department of Healthcare Services that audits them, kind of against every auditing principle that I know, but they're not an audit agency. And every time we were auditing Medi-Cal claims in the past, we always found fraud to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So all to say, we need to look at the inefficiencies in the system. We need to be better partners with our counties and cities with respect to their capacity to continue to serve, and we need to raise revenue and to offset the federal funding cuts.
Thank you. Tom Steyer.
So I have two basic beliefs about healthcare. One, healthcare is a right. And second of all, the cost of healthcare have been escalating so consistently, so long, and so fast that it is eating up every budget in this state. It's eating up every family, it's eating up every business, it's eating up every nonprofit, and it's eating up the state's budget. So there are two things that I'm talking about very specifically doing to deal with the cost issue while remembering healthcare is a right. One is, on day one, I will call a special election to go to the ballot box and close the corporate real estate tax loophole that people call split roll. It's worth over $20 billion. And let me say, this is absolutely relevant to getting housing built in this state, and we can get into that later. But we absolutely need that $20 billion, particularly in light of the fact that the Trump administration is going to kick 1 to 3 million people off of Medi-Cal next year. The second thing, that will do something to get us balanced budgets going forward as healthcare continues to escalate need us. And let me say that when I talk to teachers who are on strike, I asked them why, and they said, we can't afford our healthcare. It's everywhere. Secondly, I'm 100% for single payer. Single payer regimens around the world cost half as much as our healthcare and produce at least as good results or better. We have no choice. It will take us at least 3 years. We have to start on day one. It's absolutely the only way to go.
Thank you. Tony Thurman.
I too support single payer. I have a brother who passed away at the age of 35. When he lost his job, he lost his insurance. He was diagnosed with a rare liver disorder. This is a person who didn't drink or smoke. No one should lose their life because they don't have insurance. And we can do better, and we must do better. As governor, I'm going to work with Congress. We have to flip Congress and have a Congress that will reverse the effects of the big ugly bill that's going to kick everybody off of Medi-Cal. We have to also go after all these hospital systems that are putting profits well above patients. So many of them have billions in profits. Even the nonprofit systems have $65, $66 billion that they're calling reserves. They're really hiding them as profits. We have to be prepared to close the loopholes in healthcare. The hospitals in rural communities and other communities are going to close as a result of the big ugly bill. And that's why I support the billionaire tax that's on the ballot to have more money for healthcare immediately. I'm a social worker by training. I spent 20 years working with foster youth and helping them get housing, running clinics to help them. And we use Medi-Cal. And we know that Medi-Cal is a federal entitlement. If you're eligible, you get it. And so we have to make changes. And when I'm governor, we're going to restore universal health care for undocumented immigrants right now in this state and make sure that people aren't afraid of ICE being in a hospital. We've passed legislation to keep ICE out of our hospitals and out of our schools, and we will protect all in California, including our undocumented immigrants.
Thank you. Antonio Villaraigosa.
At a time when Donald Trump's big ugly bill is eviscerated Medi-Cal in this state with about 2 million people losing that health care coverage, and all of the folks who will also lose covered California because they won't have subsidies, the state absolutely has to have a role. Because like my colleagues on this stage, I believe health care is a right. I grew up in a home where my mother struggled to make ends meet. I had a congenital tumor in the spine that paralyzed me as a young man. My mother had to quit her job so that she could help pay for the surgery I had. And I'll tell you this, everybody ought to have health care in this state. That's why I authored Healthy Families. Healthy Families was the largest expansion of health care since Medi-Cal until Obamacare. More than 1 million kids got health care as a result. The next governor is going to have to focus on the fact that these cuts are enormous. I believe we ought to have a public option that competes with the insurance companies and forces them to drive down the cost. because that's the biggest reason why we spend more per capita than other countries do.
Thank you. Now a question about climate. As climate impacts like extreme heat, wildfires, and flooding intensify across California, marginalized communities often face the greatest risks. What role, if any, should the state play in helping these communities adapt? And what specific actions would you prioritize to protect low-income households, people with health vulnerabilities, and other at-risk populations? Tom Steyer.
So it's important to recognize whenever we think about climate policy or environmental policy, to remember that we have had structural racism in where we put the toxicity in our state for as long as there's been toxicity. So that if you go to one part of Fresno, the poor part of Fresno, 2 miles away, in a rich part of Fresno, people have a 22-year longer life expectancy. It's structural, it's been intentional, and whenever we're thinking about environmental policy, we have to start with environmental justice to make sure that we are intentionally remedying it and being aware of it. So for instance, when we've done the cap and trade policy, or the cap and invest policy as it's now called, specifically 30% of that money was sent directly to the most at-risk communities, which have been fundamentally and structurally picked on and prejudiced against. And that has to go in every single environmental policy we start with environmental justice. And let me say, I've spent an enormous amount of time on climate. I have a very detailed climate policy, including about zoning. But the truth is, this state has intentionally, because they could, put all of the dirty plants, dirty roads, and dirty facilities in low-income black and brown communities. It's unacceptable. It has to be remedied specifically in every policy.
Thank you. Tony Thurman.
I guess Tom's telling my life story. I spent the last 25 years representing communities like Richmond that sends more people to the hospital for asthma than any other city in the county of Contra Costa County. Today, I also live in the Inland Empire, in the part of the world that has the worst air quality in the entire United States. And so that's why I've passed legislation that says we will close idle oil wells in this state, and that we charge the biggest fees on those who pollute our air, our water, and our land. We have to hold polluters accountable with what they know, hit them in the wallet, hit them in their financial bottom line, right? And so if we want environmental justice, we have to make sure that we hold those who pollute accountable and create opportunities to invest in new technologies. Like I did when I was a member of the Richmond City Council, and we established a job training program in construction that focuses on solar panel installation. We have the greatest university systems in the world, the UC and the CSU. We have to invest in them to make sure that we are exploring new technologies. We got to make sure that we find a way to have water for people in our state. My goodness, there are people in our state who don't have water to drink, water to bathe. We have farm workers who work in places where they can't even wash the pesticides off of their bodies that they're exposed to. We got to get rid of those pesticides. We have to invest in more seawater runoff and ways to have more water in our state. We can create environmental justice. I've done it as a legislator, and I'll continue to do it as your governor, and make sure that we build out the electric charging stations for those who want to have electric vehicles.
Thanks so much. Mr. Villaraigosa.
Yeah, I grew up at a time when in LA you couldn't go out in the afternoon to play, or in the morning because of smog. That's why when I was Speaker of the California State Assembly, I authored the Calm Water Act, which was the biggest effort to clean up the air since the Clean Air Act until AB 32 and SB 32. And what it did was provide grants to operators of dirty diesel engines. It's why when I was on the MTA board, I took us from the dirtiest diesel fleet in the nation to the cleanest, all clean fuel vehicles. It's why when I was mayor of Los Angeles, #1 American city in reducing carbon emissions, #5 in the world. The port, which is the biggest emitter of carcinogens in the state, is the greenest port in the world. And so the next governor, and reduced our water consumption to 1970 levels when we had 1 million less people. Focused on building public transit, so we're getting out of our single passenger automobile. And finally, did the first climate adaptation study, because you can't identify the vulnerabilities and what happens with the at-risk populations until you do an analysis of it. I did that. The whole state has to do a climate adaptation study so that we can do it as well.
Thank you. Betty Yee.
The state has a tremendous role to play in terms of protecting these communities. Look, I think what you see among the four of us is that each of us has been throughout the state. We've seen environmental injustice in every corner of the state. And what I will say the role of the state should be is looking at how we can use the levers that we have to, one, bring opportunities to these communities, two, to help with their health impacts, and then three, looking at how we can do better in terms of prioritizing all of our climate funding and programming to these frontline communities. When I look at what is happening in some of the regions of California, and we've been there, the warehouse logistics industry in the Inland Empire, the Tijuana River Valley with the cross-border pollution issues, the Central Valley where there are high rates of asthma, allergies, and cancer. You know, all these things we can actually do something about. And what I like to do is actually lean in on these very communities, because we, even within the environment of where the Trump administration is rolling back environmental protections, California can still be the industrial leader in climate technology. This is going to be a high demand area of the economy that we can stand up in these frontline communities. But more importantly, the lever that California has is in each of the areas that I've just identified, we should be declaring a public health emergency. People can't keep living like this. High rates of asthma, high rates of cancer, every other person you talk to having an allergy. We've got to do better. We've got to bring much needed assistance to these communities so that they can actually look at building an economy that's going to work in keeping them healthy rather than extracting their health away from them.
Thank you. Californians are navigating rising costs of housing, healthcare, and basic necessities. What do you believe a basic social safety net in California should include, and how would your administration ensure these protections remain stable during economic downturns when, as we know, revenues tend to dip sharply in California? Mr. Thurman?
You know, people are always talking about how they're going to make the cost of living go down. You know, the last time I checked, government can't do that. And so I think that what we have to do is change the conditions for those who are struggling in those environments. We have to help Californians get access to better paying jobs. We have 85,000 jobs in technology that are available right now in California. We have jobs in biotechnology where we can help those who can earn at various levels, whether you have a PhD or a high school diploma. We are in one of the regions that has some of the greatest life science in our state. But until we get there, until we help Californians increase their wages, I'm proposing to give every working class Californian and middle class Californian a tax credit so that you have more money in your pocket every single month to help pay for the rising costs of gas, groceries, and housing. And we will finance that tax credit by taxing those billionaires who haven't paid their fair share. Californians are paying at the pump, are paying for housing, and paying in the grocery aisle. And we've got to give Californians more support. And so to offset the high costs of housing, we will provide these tax credits while we streamline permitting, while we get more funding for our state government to build more units of housing, while we provide down payment assistance home. How many of you have heard people say this? Their kids are saying, yeah, we're trying to buy a starter home, and a starter home goes for $600,000. We have to do better. We have to build wages, and we'll start by providing a tax credit to working and middle-class Californians.
Thank you. Mr. Bureaucratic.
I believe food security is part of a basic safety net. All of us should be able to eat and thrive. I believe healthcare is part of a basic safety net. Like my colleagues here, I believe healthcare is a right. I think a safe neighborhood and good schools is part of the safety net. We know that some neighborhoods are safer, some neighborhoods have better schools. Everybody ought to have that. How do we get there? We got to do a couple of things. We've said already that budgets are a reflection of your priorities and your values. And the state of California, with a $300+ billion budget's got to focus on the safety net first. Government always works for the rich and powerful, but the measure of a great government is whether they work for the folks that don't have means. One of the reasons why I believe some people didn't show up today is because you don't endorse and you don't give money. Well, at the end of the day, we showed up because we understand shelter's important, a safety net is critical, and the next governor is going to have to focus on all of those things, but it starts with a safety net.
Thank you. Betty.
Yeah. So let me just maybe put a frame around this in terms of what California is experiencing. We are experiencing a widening wealth gap that is really having a disproportionate impact on our black and brown families, and now encroaching up into the middle class. And as I travel the state, and no surprise, it's true with each of us, the two things that we most identify with in our lives are place, where we call home, where we feel connected to community, and also work. And when I see that both of these things are going to be disruptive or are not going to be within reach for people, that should be how we define our safety net. When it relates to work, we need to get out ahead of the impacts of the increasing prominence of AI in our economy, throughout our economy. We are reading about displacements of workers now in the thousands, not in the hundreds. So when I'm your governor, I'm going to be looking at a safety net as a workers first fund, where we can actually talk about how we can get people back into jobs quickly after they're displaced because of AI. We're going to have companies pay into that fund that are already gaining from AI development and deployment. And we're going to also look at how we develop economic mobility opportunities right where people live. This is what we need to do when we talk about building economically sustainable communities. And frankly, those that are trying to exploit that right now and making profits ought to be paying into this fund as we speak.
Thank you. Outside.
So, for the last 14 years, I've been an advocate for economic and environmental justice in California. But for 20 plus years before that, I was a professional investor. And I want to tell you something about what's going on right now from my investor hat. We have an idiot as president. And he is hurting us. And he is going to hurt us. We've talked about him kicking people off Medi-Cal. But if you look at where this economy is going, prices are going up. We have zero job creation. And this morning, housing starts were down 17%. So when we talk about a safety net in a minute and a half, that's the job of government. I mean, education and healthcare, that's why I'm doing split roll, because split roll is $20 billion basically for education and healthcare at the local level. But where else are people really getting hurt? Look, one place is at the pump. We should have a windfall profits tax on these oil companies that are getting $70 billion gift from this president's war when the people in California are suffering. That's one way to pay for that. I said we needed a renter's tax credit because we need to support renters because they are really stretched. And the last thing, I want to echo what Betty Yee was saying. AI can be a huge thing. It's Californian. Californians need to be at the table. We need to be getting paid for that as the place that centers it, and we can use that as a fund for the people of California, a sovereign wealth fund for the people of California to provide the kind of safety net that we're talking about here.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, everyone hold on to your hats. This next question is about state bureaucracy. Governor Newsom set in motion a plan to consolidate the state's various housing programs into one state entity. And by July, we're told, a new California Housing and Homelessness Agency is set to be in place. You will have the opportunity to choose that agency's secretary. What would you be looking for in a candidate to fill that role, and how would you measure their success? Mr. Villaraigosa, we can start with you.
Well, having been a mayor, I've had to pick agency heads in the past. I always look for a leader who leads by example, someone who has expertise in their field, someone that walks in not just with the brain, because the brain is important, but with the heart as well. Understand that caring and seeing with the heart is as important as operating with the brain. Someone who understands that they're going to be accountable. We're going to have dashboards. They're going to be judged on the number of housing units they provide with services for the homeless. They're going to be judged on the policies that they implement to make sure that we're actually finally starting to make a dent in homelessness. And they're going to understand that the buck stops first with them and then with me. Because at the end of the day, if the governor's not responsible, who is?
Thank you. Betty.
Sure. Look, I think the whole arena of housing and homelessness has become so complex from an administrative standpoint that really the quality that I'm going to be looking for the most in a candidate is a can-do attitude. No is not acceptable anymore in terms of how we meet our housing needs. And so, yes, someone with expertise, and frankly, someone that maybe has some lived experience with respect to just what people are feeling challenged about with respect to housing right now. But we have a long-term plan, and frankly, thank you, Housing California, for really creating the roadmap of what we need to do. It's not a secret about what we need to do. I think all of us here, and I look out to all of you have such a big hand in trying to make dreams come true and try to uplift communities. And we need to be a better partner with all of you in doing that, and with our local government partners as well. So this is going to be about a can-do attitude. This person will be accountable to me every day to give me progress reports about how much housing we've constructed, how many families we've gotten housed. This is the urgency we have to bring to this work. And so to me, that is the ultimate quality.
Thank you. Tom Steyer.
So I think it's really important when you talk about who to hire that you understand that who you hire is policy. And in effect, we're going to have somebody who has two related but distinct jobs. One is to build at least 1 million units in 4 years, and the other is to make sure that we deal compassionately and effectively with our homelessness problem. I think in terms of the former, what I've been saying is we need to treat housing as a public investment. And we need someone who understands how to actually get that done and simplify all the multiple things we're trying to accomplish there into one, which is we need to build a lot of housing because that affects everybody in the state of California. And we need to focus on that. And we specifically need someone who's going to go after those starter homes. In terms of homelessness, that seems to me to be something where we also need massive focus on a new approach. Because as we've been saying, getting people off the streets, keeping people off the streets, and providing them an interim solution where they can reintegrate into society much sooner and much more effectively is critical. So as I agree with Antonio, we need someone who's really smart, but we also need somebody who is sharing those goals implicitly and those values, because they're going to be making decisions when nobody else is around, a lot of them. And so it's head and heart and leadership.
Thank you. Tony Thurman.
Well, maybe the person who's going to head that agency is in the room. Raise your hand so we know where to start, where we're looking. I'm glad I saw some hands go up. Look, there is no substitute for experience in this arena. As someone who I started my career working for a community development corporation when there actually was some federal money, for new housing. We've got to get back to that. I would love to work with someone who's worked in a nonprofit housing organization and has had to build housing at scale. I would love to work with someone who's worked on the for-profit side, who understands how to make it pencil when it's so difficult, when government regulations slow everything down. At the end of the day, I want someone who is the kind of leader who is not afraid to lead. And right now, government, many of you know this, government, it's no mystery how slow government is. And government is often stuck in the paralysis of analysis. Do something, damn it. We have to move. I would rather fail trying than simply do nothing or do what we've always done. Because when you do what you've always done, you get the same thing that you've always gotten. And so I want a leader who has experience, who is also a listener. We can use participatory government and listen to you all about where we can get better. Help us define how we get better. Like the town hall on housing that I'm doing this Friday for my bill AB 673 to fund housing for the 10,000 homeless youth. I hope you'll participate and join our movement to make the agency better.
Thank you. Permanent supportive housing pairs affordable housing with services like health care, case management, and employment support, and supporters believe it helps people exit homelessness. What role should permanent supportive housing play in California's approach to homelessness? And how would you support or fund that approach, if at all, especially given recent proposed changes at the federal level to steer funding away from that approach? We'll start with Betty.
So this is one area that I think the state really needs to be very clear about our commitment. It is an essential piece in the continuum of how we look at supporting our unhoused community all the way to getting into a stable rental situation, and yes, even home ownership eventually. And what I want to do is to actually rebuild the relationship between the state and our counties. You know, when we look at what has happened in terms of the current situation with homelessness funding, the coordination has been poor, the articulation of expectations between among the state, counties, and cities has been poor, and when we look at the outcomes, we take a punitive approach when we don't see the outcomes that we want. So this is about having much more accountability and transparency at the outset, looking at what it is that we're trying to achieve. The funding, again, we're going to need to have a permanent source of funding, and you know, our homeless and housing assistance program funding, we should make that permanent. I mean, this is not a start and stop kind of a situation. We have a situation where you can't even plan how we're going to serve this population when you don't know what your funding situation is going to be like. So an important part of the continuum and looking at how we have better coordination, but the local government success is the state success when we look at how we are able to stand up permanent supportive housing in a robust way.
Thank you. Tom Steyer.
So, obviously, homelessness has been a continuing problem for California. We've spent an enormous amount of money, by some estimates, $24 billion in 5 years, without really reducing homelessness at all, and actually where stasis is considered success. And I think what we've been saying on this stage is we're going to have to take a different approach. And I think the reason that I've been talking so much about emergency interim housing is to get people off the streets and give them a chance to introduce themselves in a productive way into society. Because at the approach that we've been using of basically shelters, long-term housing is taking 7 years to deliver. Long-term housing is costing us $750,000 a unit, and it's not been reducing homelessness. So we clearly need a different approach and a different mix if in fact being on the street is as dangerous, vulnerable, and stressful as I absolutely believe it is. And that's why I'm saying, are we going to continue to use long-term housing for those people who need it with supportive services? Yes. But it has got to be a much smaller part of the intended solution, a much smaller part of the mix, because as long as that's our answer, we're going to continue to have this problem. And it also is cruel to the people who are asking to wait that long in shelters they don't want to be in or on the street.
Thank you. Tony Thurman.
You know, we know supportive housing works. We've known this for decades. In other states, right, supportive housing to me is like a person needs more than just a unit, right? They need those wraparound supports that will help them. Like the state offers a program that I've helped to work with foster youth to get their first apartment who were formerly homeless. We provide the Transitional Housing Plus program, THP Plus. Other states have had so much success with supportive housing. In Colorado and Utah and other places where, they found that providing the additional supports, they saw a decrease in their homelessness. What they found is that some of the people who were homeless were working poor. And so we know that we have to provide these supports and that we can do it. In terms of the amount of money that should go into supportive housing, there should be an amount in our budget every single year. It has to be a priority. It has to be a policy priority. And the state has talked about supportive housing without providing it, right? The last bond was in 2018. I served in the legislature from 2015 to 2019, and I was telling my colleagues when we had the surpluses, put $1 billion every year into affordable housing. But because we had the surplus, everybody wanted to throw money into their districts. I said, well, put it in your districts in housing. Now we're playing catch up, and supportive housing is the way. And as governor, I will assure that we have money in our budget every year. And again, as I said earlier, support bond programs to augment that additionally with the $10 billion that we hope you all will pass in the next election.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Villaraigosa.
Grohl, we have to be funder in chief. I've said that we've got to have a permanent funding source for housing. That would include a permanent funding source for permanent supportive housing. When I was mayor, I wanted to build even more housing for homeless, but the county only wanted the services for housing in the less affluent areas. That doesn't work. So the other role, in addition to providing funding, we're the traffic cop. We got to say, hold it. Every community has homelessness. So you can't pick and choose where you're going to provide those services. And where they don't do it, the state should remove the services from the county and give them to the cities that want to provide that housing with services. Because we all know that the chronically homeless, while I believe in a housing first strategy, the chronically homeless are not going to be helped without the services they need, the mental health services, the drug rehab services. And so permanent support funding, but also the traffic cop that ensures that we're putting permanent supportive housing in every community.
Thank you so much. This next question is about affordable housing production. California's available housing supply does not match demand, but it's also broadly accepted that the market is not likely to provide affordable housing to the lowest income Californians without subsidy, at least not anytime soon. What role should the state play, if any, in addressing the shortage of affordable homes, especially for low-income Californians and residents experiencing homelessness? And what specific state policy changes, if any, would you prioritize in that response? Tom Steyer.
So I always say there's no silver bullet for California's housing problem. It's silver buckshot. And this is a perfect example because we are not producing low-income housing at any kind of cost that anybody can afford, let alone low-income people. So what are we going to do about that? First of all, I'm a huge fan of financing support for low-income people. Absolutely, I've talked about it. We should be looking at housing as a government investment. So let's start with that. But secondly, we need to rezone for much smaller housing. We're seeing around the country that people are able to build tens of thousands of units by changing zoning and allowing more density, more units in a specific lot. That is something that we can do. And these lots are 900 square feet, not 2,500 square feet. And for developers, that can be a very profitable thing. I think the other thing that we're going to have to do is do industrialized construction to drive down the cost. There's been a big study of it by Buffy Wicks and UC Berkeley, and we know we can drive down the cost per square foot by a third to a half. So when we look at all of this, we absolutely should be subsidizing low-income people. We absolutely should be building much more densely, much smaller units around public transportation, and we should be doing it. We should be building houses the way we build cars because it's so much cheaper and it means that people can afford to buy them.
Thank you. Mr. Thurman.
Well, I hope that you all will go out and support my bill, AB 673, to help fund housing for the 10,000 teens in our state, because if we don't help them, they will become homeless adults. As I mentioned, as governor, I intend to bring back some form of redevelopment agency so that cities and counties have resources to build housing for those who are unhoused and to build affordable housing. And you think about all the companies that have, as we talk about stock and the lack of available stock, think about all the companies that have just been amassing properties and just holding on to it. And that's driving up the cost. And so as governor, I'm going to assess a fee on any company that's just holding on to properties and preventing them from being used for affordable housing or for development or for those who are unhoused. And then finally, I just think we have to streamline the permitting processes. When I was in the legislature, I passed bills to create junior housing, accessory dwelling units, and we know that we can do this without requiring more parking. We've got to streamline the process. If we can streamline and fast-track building stadiums in the state of California, we can create a way to get over-the-counter, streamline housing development in each of the communities in the state of California. And I want to work with you. A better California is possible. Let's get this done. Let's do this together.
Thank you. Mr. Villaraigosa.
The role, clear. I said from the beginning, in fact, we all did, that we should have a permanent funding source for housing. That includes a permanent funding source for housing with supportive services, affordable, and I believe workforce as well. So that's one role. Second role is we've got to be a traffic cop again. We've got to, for affordable housing, we've got to cut the red tape and build faster and cheaper. We've got to think out of the box with respect to what housing looks like, the size of housing. You know, as an example, I think the average housing unit is $850,000 a unit. We know that we could build for less if we cut red tape, if we change zoning laws, if we address the fact that it's impossible to build any kind of housing in this state. And so the governor has got to focus on all three of those areas.
Thank you. Ms. Yee.
Certainly, the state has a tremendous role here in addressing the shortage of these homes. But I want to add another dimension to this, and that is I think everything we've talked about here today really has to be centered on achieving equity. You know, when I look at, as we've talked about who's unhoused, as we've talked about the growing wealth gap, it certainly is affecting the communities that we know who are now comprised of the majority of California, the minority majority. And these are the people falling behind. So what I would like to see is actually, as we're looking at building this housing, that we're actually breaking that cycle in terms of who continues to become unhoused and at risk of becoming unhoused. So looking at some of, being sure that our anti-discrimination housing laws are being enforced well, looking at how we, yes, put urgency into what we're building, because these are people who really do need to become stabilized much more quickly, but also looking at how we are going to hold ourselves to account for that. You know, as Mr. Steyer, all of us has said, every dollar in housing is an investment. We have to create an accountability system that actually helps us measure that. You know, what are we actually getting in return for that dollar of investment? And it's probably, you know, people who are spending, we're spending less on public assistance, we're spending less on job training. Whatever the offset is, we have got to start measuring that, because we know there's great returns on investment. We have to start demonstrating that.
Thank you so much. And now we are going to move on to some lightning round questions, because clearly 90 seconds allowed way too much nuance. So we're just going to ask that you simply respond support or oppose to the following, if you could. And we can just start on this end and just move down.
Okay.
First, do you support or oppose increasing corporate tax rates to fund state programs or priorities?
Could you repeat the question?
Corporations are going to have to pay more.
I couldn't hear
We
that.
can't hear you.
Do you support
support-
raising corporate tax rates?
Do you support or oppose increasing corporate tax rates to fund state programs or priorities?
Okay.
That's a support from Tom.
Well, let me say this. One-word answers to complicated questions are kind of tough.
They are tough.
We're going to close
Go.
corporate tax loopholes, and
we could just
corporations
do-
are going to pay more. It's going to be a variety of ways. So the answer is I support corporations paying their fair share, which is more than they're paying now.
We'll take that as a support.
Support!
Hey, there you go.
I support everybody paying their fair share.
Okay.
Support.
Thank you all. Do you support or oppose changes to Proposition 13 that would alter property tax rules for commercial properties?
I'm absolutely going to call a special election on day one because I support it so strongly.
Support!
I support, but we have to fix the whole broken tax system.
Support.
Thank you. Do you support or oppose establishing a wealth tax on high net worth individuals?
We're going to have to tax high wealth individuals
That's
more
support.
in a variety of ways. I've been for a wealth tax since 2019.
That.
Support!
I'm opposed to the wealth tax because I know that they're just going to leave. They're already leaving.
Support, but wealth is very hard to define.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad we got some disagreement there. Do you support or oppose maintaining health care benefits for undocumented Californians?
Yes.
Support.
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 Do you support or oppose assessing new or additional fees on fossil fuel companies for climate change damages?
Polluters must pay, absolutely support.
New fees.
Support.
Climate change.
Do you support or oppose assessing new or additional fees on fossil fuel companies for climate damages?
For climate damages? Support for climate damages, yes.
Support.
And do you support or oppose relaxing existing environmental standards to reduce the retail price of gasoline?
Yeah. Could you?
I'm for a windfall profits tax. That's how we reduce, how we put money in people's pockets so they can pay for gas. Make the oil and gas companies pay out of their windfall profits to the people of, directly to the people of California.
Support.
I didn't get,
Yeah,
we
we
didn't get
can't
it.
hear.
Do you support relaxing certain environmental standards in an effort to reduce the cost of retail gasoline?
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, I'm opposed. I apologize. I'm opposed. I'm opposed.
You
Relax.
didn't hear it either.
I misheard.
Windfall profits.
I
For some
misheard.
reason we can't hear it.
Opposed.
Yeah, I oppose.
Okay, so as our final question, I wanted to give everyone the opportunity to just answer in 60 seconds this time. Each candidate will have 60 seconds. If you're elected governor, what will your highest priority be in the first 90 days in office? Mr. Villaraigosa, do you want to start?
Look, this is a great state. All the politicians love to say how we're the fourth largest economy in the world. What they don't say is that we have the highest poverty rate in the United States along with Louisiana. The fact is the next governor is going to have to focus on affordability. The high cost of housing, the high cost of utilities, the high cost of gas. So I'm going to focus like a laser beam on addressing affordability. And I believe that you need a proven problem solver, someone who's done that before.
Thank you. Let's see.
When I'm elected governor, my highest priority will be to be sure that we keep every Californian housed, and those who are unhoused, that we are making progress on that. As I mentioned earlier at the outset, housing is really the determinant of so many factors in terms of each of our success. And it's related to health outcomes, academic performance, certainly in the community, public safety, crime prevention, and the like. But how we get there, to tackle the affordability issue, we need a governor who has to focus on fixing the state budget. And fixing the state budget means how do we look at making sure that we have permanent sources of funding for all the things that we've talked about here today. This is an investment. We have to talk about our budget as being an investment and what the returns on those dollars are, and showing where other areas of the budget are being offset because the investment is actually yielding benefits. So that would be my highest priority.
Thank you. Mr. Steyer.
Well, I think the two things that are going on here in the state of California, one is affordability, and the other is what Betty Yee just said, which is we need to be able to fund our state government at a time when the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is punching us in the gut. That's why on day one, I will call a special election to close the corporate real estate tax loophole so we have an extra $22 billion to make sure that we can deliver the services that every single person on this stage is saying is critical to the people of California. And in terms of affordability, we will start in housing with the help of the people in this room on day one to fire every single one of those silver buckshot to make sure that we build housing and that we protect renters. And lastly, when we talk about affordability, I really am for a windfall profits tax. These oil companies are ripping us off because their president started a war half a world away. It's absolutely critical that we put money in the pockets of Californians directly through that tax and through a renter's tax credit.
Mr. Thurman.
You know, Betty has said it, you know, we have to tackle budget issues, and every year we're facing a deficit. And I've worked in every level of government for the last 18 years, and, you know, I can see we need permanent funding sources. We cannot continue to rely just on income tax in this state. People got rich during the pandemic, and we had record surpluses. And coming out of the pandemic all these years, now we have all these deficits. That tells you that we have to do something different. I've served as a city council member, school board member, state legislator twice as state superintendent, and I know for a fact that we need revenue. Now, I will call a special election of our legislature to close the loopholes in Prop 13. And if they won't do it, I'll use the powers of governor to use by executive order to close loopholes in Prop 13. We need that revenue, and you need that revenue to build more housing, and Californians need to have more money in their pocket every single month to pay for gas, groceries, and housing.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for these very thoughtful responses to these questions. I now want to invite all of you to share your final thoughts on addressing housing and homelessness in California and what your leadership would look like as governor. And we will start with Ms. Yee.
Thank you. Thank you to Housing California for this opportunity. And, you know, I look out at all of you and I look out at my colleagues here on the stage, and I'm going to actually take something that my 102-year-old mother tells me all the time. You know, when I look at her and I talk about the challenges that we're facing, and she just looks back at me and she says, "We know what we got to do. We know what we got to do." And that's how I feel about housing and homelessness. It is not a mystery about what we have to do. It is a matter of political will and leadership. And as your governor, this will be the priority, because our economy, and frankly, we knew this 2 decades ago, if we do not do anything about long-term housing stability and affordability, it will continue to be a drag on any kind of sustained economic growth. And we are experiencing that right now. And so this will become a priority. The political will be there. Look, I am not interested in running for president of the United States. I want to be a good governor, and I want to do this job well, and in partnership with all of you, let's get this done.
First of all, again, I want to thank you for being here. Housing is one of the most important issues that we're facing in this state. Folks, my mother once told me, "No eres lo que digas, eres lo que hagas." You're not what you say, you're what you do. The fact of the matter is, all of us talk well, we're all progressive, but at the end of the day, in order to see what somebody's going to do is to look what they've done. I was Speaker of the California State Assembly when we were a purple state. I worked with a Republican and a Democratic governor and balanced 2 budgets with a surplus, more money for education and public safety, the largest expansion of healthcare, the biggest effort to clean up the air. I authored both of those. When I was mayor, #1 American city in reducing greenhouse gases, #5 in the world, I already said I built more housing than the 12 years before me, and I had a recession. LA was one of the most violent big cities in America when I became mayor. When I left, it was one of the safest, with constitutional community policing. We built more light rail than anyone else in the United States, and we built more transit-oriented development, housing along light rail lines, built more infrastructure than anyone. We need a proven problem solver, everyone, someone who's done it before. I'd be honored to have your support. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Tony Thurman.
Thank you again for today. You know, you got a tough choice ahead of you, all right? A lot of candidates, a lot of great people who are running. I submit to you, I'd ask you to consider 3 things, because you all get a chance to vote, right? You don't make an endorsement, but you get a chance to vote. And those 3 things are experience, select a candidate who has a vision. I've talked about the plan to build 2 million housing units to support $10 billion in down payment assistance programs for those who want to buy a home. The 3rd thing that I would offer and submit to you that you consider is lived experience. Someone who understands what Californians are going through, who's going to fight for working people and middle-class people who are being priced out and who are being pushed out. As I shared with you, as the son and grandson of immigrants, I'm the descendant of grandparents who were descendants of slaves who came here looking for a better opportunity. My grandparents cleaned bathrooms for a living to have a better life, and they found it here in California. Let's restore the American dream. When my mom passed away, I was raised by a cousin who I didn't know. In a household, we were raised on public assistance, food stamps, free lunch programs, and government cheese. And in spite of those humble beginnings, education changed my life, and I could help others like foster youth and homeless youth. And so I know from experience that we can make the American dream possible of those who want to own a home possible. And so, I hope that you'll all check out my programs and support my legislation, and together we'll build a better Californian for the 40 million people in the great state of California. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Closing us out, Tom Steyer.
So, housing isn't just an investment. Housing isn't just an asset or a money question. When I was buying my first house, I thought it was way too expensive, and I called my mom to tell her that. And she said, "Sonny, You're building a life here with your wife, your pregnant wife. Housing really matters. So when we talk about the urgency of housing, it is at the heart of everyone's life, to build a life, to build a dream, to look into the future. And so the urgency with which we deal with zoning, permitting, industrial construction, financing, it's actually talking about allowing people to live the California dream. Look, my wife and I started a nonprofit community bank 20 years ago. We financed 17,000 low-income housing units. As an investor, I've built lots of things. This is going to be, we need a changing in the way we do housing because it's not working. We need a change in the way we're doing homelessness because it's not working. This state is going to require a change agent to come in and do things differently. And honestly, if you look piece by piece, I am someone who's willing to take on the existing ways of thinking, the funded opposition, and I have taken them on in the past. I am taking them on right now in this election. They are going after me, but the truth is we need change in the state of California. I can do it.
Thank you so much. Palm Sire, Tony Thurman, Antonio Villaraigosa, Betty, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Tony.
And thanks to everyone here who came in to watch, everyone who watched on the live stream. A special thanks to the folks at Housing California and to everyone who helped make this forum possible. And to offer a few closing remarks, please join back to the stage Shioni Fliegel. Thank you. Sorry you couldn't hear.
Thank you again to our candidates for your participation and to Ben for moderating this discussion. Can we get another round of applause? And thank you to all of you for investing your time in the future of housing in California.